Hey folks, this is a pretty long freaking video, so I've left you a table of contents down in the video description with timestamps to all the sections. If at any point you start getting bored, just jump to the next section or jump to whichever section you jump straight to the conclusions. I don't care. Enjoy. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. Today we're looking at the RunCam Split. The RunCam Split promises to be the holy grail of cameras for FPV. It transmits a standard definition analog feed back to your video transmitter so you can watch in your goggles, and it records high-def video on board the copter. So you can get high-def without having to carry a second camera. So is it the holy grail of cameras? Yes and no. Stay tuned. A lot of the reviews that I do are pretty subjective. I very seldom say, yes, buy this, much to the disappointment of the vendors who send me products. And I also very seldom say, no, don't buy this. If a product is really terrible, I tend just to not show it to you and not just waste your time beating it up. This one is also subjective, but I think it's actually going to be a little more cut and dried than some of the ones that I do. Because the RunCam Split does some things really freaking well. In fact, it does at least one thing that no one else does right now, which is record high def on board and transmit analog back to the video transmitter in one device. So there are a few things that it does, and if those things are your killer features, then you're going to want to get it. And there are a few things that are wrong with it, and if those things are killer for you, then you're not going to want to get it. But I think by the end of this video, you're going to really know, there's not going to be any question to you whether you should buy this or not. Before we get down into the details of the specifications and features, let's look at the one thing that everybody cares about the most, and that's the image quality. I'm going to let you look at some footage, and then we'll come back and I'll tell you my thoughts. The high def image that this camera puts out is pretty good. Is it as good as a GoPro? Which is, of course, the question everybody always wants to ask. And I don't think that's the right question to ask here, because if you go with this camera, you don't have to run a GoPro and you're saving like 70 grams of weight. And especially on a small copter, that's going to make a massive amount of difference. There are many 3-inch and 4-inch and maybe even 2-inch builds that can now have high def recording that never could have before, not with good handling anyway. So if the image that comes out of this camera isn't quite as good as a GoPro, whatever that means, it's still way better than the image you were going to get from your non-existent high-def camera that you weren't running anyway because you couldn't afford the weight. The analog image coming out of the FPV feed is, to be honest with you, I think it's the best I've ever seen. It has all of the characteristics that I like about the RunCam Eagle, which is the wide dynamic range and the super high resolution. I really feel like these cameras are getting as much resolution as you can possibly freaking get out of an NTSC or PAL signal. But it doesn't have any of the negatives of the Eagle, like the moire artifacting or that shimmeriness that everybody hates. But it doesn't all come for nothing. This camera has a much higher latency than the Eagle 2. Even, I think it's on par maybe with the Eagle 1. I'd have to go back and look. Much higher latency though. Oscar Lang's latency testing, by the way, thank you to Oscar Lang for doing this wonderful latency testing. Link down in the video description to check it out. He's testing FPV camera latency. He's in the best way I know of anybody doing it today. He shows this camera with an average latency of 38 milliseconds and a max latency of in the 50s. Whereas the Eagle 2 and the RunCam, the Swift 2, they have a latency in the low to mid 20s. So the latency of this camera is not quite twice as much as a Swift. So if you're a hardcore racing pilot, even if you're racing like, 4-inch copters, you might be thinking, oh, I'm going to put this in and I'm going to get a high def image. That'll be nice. You got to find out how much latency you can tolerate. I still think that 38 milliseconds of latency, despite the fact that many of you will turn up your noses and go, 38 milliseconds is terrible, oh my God. I still think that many pilots will not notice the difference between like 23 milliseconds and 38 milliseconds. Maybe I'm wrong about that, and you may know whether you care, but you can judge for yourself. We have to acknowledge one problem with the footage from the RunCam Split, and that is that you can very often see the props, or in my case, the standoffs in the high-def footage. And one reason for that is that the camera is not up on top of the copter out of the way anymore, but one reason for is that we very often want a really wide field of view for an action camera. That's just what we've come to expect from action cameras. And that super wide field of view, 165 degrees is the default for the Split. It just is going to catch those details. Whereas the field of view that we use for like a RunCam Swift with like a 2.5 millimeter lens, it might be more like 140 degrees or 150 degrees. And that's just narrow enough to get those things out of the camera. But frankly, if you see your props, or maybe you see just the edge of your standoff in your FPV feed, who cares? Nobody sees that anyway. But in your high-def footage, you're making that to show off, and you really don't want to see those things. Now, RunCam sent me another lens that they asked me to try, and it says on the box that it has a 140-degree field of view. And I thought, great, they've got a narrower angle lens that they want me to try that'll get rid of that stuff. But actually, it turned out not to be true. This is their GoPro quality lens. It's a $3 upgrade for the Split. It has a much larger lens element, and it's got better image quality, right? But it doesn't have any different field of view, and I don't know why the box says it's 140 degrees. I've compared it extensively against the other one, and it's the same field of view. Some people are putting a narrower angle field of view, a narrower angle lens on the Split. You can buy, after just a standard M12 thread, you can buy any standard security camera lens and put it on there. And there are other people who've put out videos showing what one they use. But here's the problem with that. If you go to a narrower field of view, then yeah, you don't see the props anymore, but you're flying with a narrower field of view. It's like going back to a 2.8 millimeter lens in your FPV feed, and that's not really a great thing. And the other thing is that we are used to seeing this ultra wide angle lens in our high def footage. It's what many people prefer and what everybody is used to, and you're not going to get that with a RunCam Split. You're either going to end up with props in view, or your standoffs in view, or you're going to be flying in your FPV feed and your high def with a narrower angle. It's a trade-off you're kind of going to have to make. I suppose one solution for this would be to have a special frame where the FPV camera mounts up top, which I know some of those frames used to exist with the goal of getting the high-def camera down closer to the center line for better handling. And maybe we'll see a resurgence in some of those frame designs, because the Split, if it were mounted up top, higher from the prop line and further forward, then we certainly could end up with a nice wide angle and not seeing anything. But as of now, I think that's a trade-off you're just going to have to make. Let's start by just looking at the product, and here it is mounted inside my QAV-R. Here's the camera that comes with it. It is similar in size to the RunCam Mini, and in fact it has this, you kind of can't see it here, but it has the same kind of cradle that it fits into to make it fit into the standard 1177 or Swift sized mounting that basically all frames do. Until there are frames that are actually custom built for the RunCam Mini or the Aero Mini, the Foxeer Aero Mini is a similar size, I'm not sure I see the point of these cameras. You just stick them inside a plastic cradle to make them the size that your frame expects, and there you go. Here's where you install the SD card, and here's the USB port. The USB port is used to download stuff off the SD card, which is very convenient because the SD card is not a slide-in SD card slot like a spring-loaded one like you would expect to see well on many other boards, or even like the Betaflight F3 where the SD card slides in. It's not spring-loaded, but it's just sort of friction slides in. This SD card slot has a flip-up door. The flip-up door on the RunCam Split's SD card holder is a mixed blessing. On the one hand, I believe that it's more secure than the slide-in spring-loaded ones. If you've ever had your copter go cartwheeling through the grass and then when you're done you notice that your card came flying out, then you'll be glad that it sort of locks in more securely. On the other hand, if it's in the stack, you can't actually remove the card very easily because there's a board in the way, or in this case I've got it installed upside down. I think I've actually got it installed upside down. But regardless, if the RunCam Split is not the top thing on the stack, then there's no way for you to open up the SD card holder and lift that door. And in fact, you can see based on the amount of room I've got here, even if it were on top of the stack, well, it depends. On this copter, I probably would have room to flip it up, but especially on something like the Armatan Chameleon or any other low-profile, small, it's going to be so tight in there, you're probably not going to be able to take the card out. I discovered this after I installed it in the copter and was super annoyed at the thought that I'd have to take the whole thing apart to put the SD card back in. But I was able to get in there with a tweezers or something and kind of, you don't actually have to flip the door all the way open. You can kind of flip it just a little bit up and then stick the card in and then kind of take the door and kind of wiggle it closed. And then once it's in there, you kind of never have to take it out again, hopefully, because you can just download everything off the USB port. And that's the hope. But I despite the fact that the flip-up card is probably more secure than a spring-loaded one, I'm not sure it was the right choice because our copters these days are getting so tight. The stack is so tight, and you have no choice but to mount this in the stack. And especially when you're soft mounting the flight controller, I don't actually think it's good to install other stuff on top of the soft mounted flight controller. I could be wrong about this, but in a situation like this, there has to be a board below to get close to the bottom plate. Otherwise, you would start your stack here and you would lose all this space. There's probably not going to be many situations where the best layout for the copter is going to be to put this RunCam Split on top of the stack. But if you don't put it on top of the stack, or sometimes even if you do, you can't open the SD card door. So, a little annoying, not insurmountable. At least what you could do is you could just install your SD card before you put the RunCam Split in the copter, then just leave it in there forever. Maybe it doesn't matter. The RunCam Split comes with a Wi-Fi module. This is super cool. It's not installed on the copter. Maybe that's just because there wasn't enough room on the board, or maybe they didn't want a Wi-Fi device continuously broadcasting and potentially interfering. I don't know, but it's a removable module. Here it is, and it's got these pins, and it plugs into the side of the Split. And this is actually why I installed the Split upside down, because the way it goes in, if you can see that if I had installed the Split flipped over the way they intended, then I could not have got the Wi-Fi module in because my arms are in the way. Installing it this way, hang on, I have to look really closely at it to get it right. It does plug in But if you look really carefully at the backside here, I'm not super happy with the electronics from the Wi-Fi module. It looks like they're making contact with the USB port. I might conformal coat the back of that if I were going to do this more often. And I pass this back to RunCam, I wish that they would sell it with a wire on it, a wire harness. So I could simply leave it sitting on the bench and plug the wires in here and not have to have it stuck up to the copter. If you are going to use the Wi-Fi module, be sure that you take into account how it's going to install and how it's going to set on the whole copter when you decide how to mount the split. You certainly can mount it upside down or any other way if you so desire. You interact with the split through these two buttons here, and remembering what they do takes a little bit of practice. I've just had to give myself a refresher as I was getting ready to talk to you. This button, the right-hand button here, starts and stops the recording. And when I start the recording, the status LED begins flashing, and you also get a red recording indicator in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, so you can see in your goggles and confirm that you're recording before you start flying. While you're recording, the left-hand button pauses the recording. Let's try that again, please. There we go. Pauses the recording or restarts it. So you can pause and restart the recording without creating a new file if you so desire. Or you can stop the recording by pressing the right-hand button again. Holding down the right-hand button powers the camera down. And I'm not really sure why you'd want to do this. It's powered up when you have the LiPo, and it's powered down when you unplug the LiPo. And for an FPV camera especially, the fact that it's got a turn off function makes me nervous, even if there's no possible way it could ever get activated in flight. I don't want my FPV camera to have an off button. Anyway, the left-hand button, if I hold it down, switches modes. It goes from video mode to picture mode. And then if I hold it down again, we go into menu mode. And in menu mode, I can flip through the options. We can check the video options, resolution, loop recording. Loop recording, when I first saw it, I thought that it meant that when the card fills up, then we'll loop back over and we'll rewrite the earlier files. But if we actually go into this menu option, we can see that the options are 1 minute, 3 minutes, and 5 minutes. And that doesn't sound like one whole SD card's worth of 1080p video. So I'm going to leave this off. It sounds like it just loops through 5 minutes of video. And we can hold a lot more than that on an SD card. You might wonder then what happens if the SD card does fill up. And thanks to Dominic Clifton, Hydra, Mr. Clean Flight, for pointing this out, apparently what happens is that you get a big notification on screen saying SD card full. A big one that fills the whole screen. Which means if you're flying and the SD card fills up, you're screwed. It's a pretty big oversight. And it's one of the reasons why I have always been suspicious of cameras that combine functionality like this. I want my FPV camera to be dead simple. Just show me the picture when power is applied and don't freaking do anything else. I'm sure that RunCam is going to put out a software update that fixes that problem soon. But if you have a RunCam Split right now, be aware that if your SD card fills up, you're in trouble. So don't let that happen while you're flying. And this is an even bigger deal because of the fact that on many builds, you won't easily be able to swap out the SD card. So in the middle of the day of flying, how are you going to get those pictures off of there? Well, hopefully you have a laptop or you have a big enough card that you can hold one full day of 1080p video. Let me give you some notes about installing the RunCam Split correctly because there's a couple of gotchas. One of the gotchas is that the RunCam Split only runs off of 5 volts. You cannot power it from VBAT. And it pulls, by the specs, it pulls about 600 milliamps. I haven't verified that. That is more than many 5-volt regulators are going to be able to pull, especially if you have anything else at all running off the 5-volt regulator. One of the mistakes that people make when they install this is they just wire it up to their video transmitter, just like it was your normal FPV camera. And the problem with that is that your video transmitter's 5-volt regulator is only sized for a little FPV camera, 60, 70 milliamps, maybe 100 milliamps at most. You cannot just wire the RunCam Split up to your video transmitter's 5-volt output. You have to wire it to at least a 1 amp 5-volt regulator wherever you've got that on your copter. The other gotcha in the installation is that the RunCam Split does not have any reverse current protection. And by the way, again, credit to Dominic Clifton, Mr. Clean Flight, for figuring this out. He was the first I saw report this. What it means is that when you plug in your RunCam Split to the USB to offload the video, it powers up your flight controller. And some flight controllers with a 5-volt regulator on board are going to object to that and potentially be damaged. I can't tell you whether it will or won't, but some of them explicitly say not to do that. The other problem is that when you plug your flight controller into USB, the RunCam Split powers up if your flight controller has a built-in 5-volt regulator like the Betaflight F3. And what that means is that it's going to be pulling from the USB port's current. And USB 2.0, I think they're rated for 500 milliamps by default, which means that you could pull too much current from the USB port on your PC, and they're supposed to be protected from that and just shut down. But maybe they could be damaged, or maybe they shut down and it just makes your USB port useless. There isn't really a good solution to this, depending on how you wire the board. Some people are unplugging the RunCam Split every time they plug in to the computer, but of course it's going to wear out the connector and it's just a pain in the butt. You can install a diode between the RunCam Split and the flight controller to prevent the RunCam Split from powering the flight controller. But there's no easy way. You could install a switch, I guess. There's no easy way to keep the RunCam Split from being powered up when you plug in your flight controller to your computer. Fortunately, these days, most of us have USB 3.0 ports, which are rated for more current and aren't going to have a problem, but some of us might have a problem. In closing then, here are the conclusions. The RunCam Split is a really exciting product. At a price of $70, it's no more expensive than a RunCam 2. And so you're kind of getting a good FPV camera for free or a good HD camera for free just by buying it. The video quality that it puts out is good to great, depending on your preferences. Some of you are going to hate it, I know, but I think it looks pretty good, especially when you consider you're saving 50 to 70 grams of weight, which is a big deal on smaller builds. I think this camera is going to kick butt in the 3-inch to 4-inch, maybe even 2-inch market, where suddenly these guys are going to be able to have high def when they just couldn't afford it before. The analog image quality is exceptional. As I said, I think it's the best I've seen. Some people are still going to prefer the type of image that a CCD camera puts out, but many people I think are going to like this. Many people who want to like the Eagle but can't because of that shimmery digital artifacting, this is a great image. You're going to love it. The question we always come back to in reviews like this is this like a GoPro killer? And I think the answer to that is no, but not because it's not as good as a GoPro. It's just different than a GoPro. It's much less expensive, of course, but the cost difference actually balances out really quickly if you have more than one copter, because you can't move it between the copters. You have to buy one for every copter you build, and it just stays in the copter. Now that's great if you've got like a 4-inch or a 3-inch build where nothing else will do. It's 70 grams lighter than a GoPro 2, so yeah, it's the only option in those cases. And in those cases, it's a great choice because any of its negatives are outweighed by its massive positives in that application. The other major difference, of course, is the field of view. You're just not going to get GoPro-style footage out of this camera in terms of the field of view, at least not until we find a frame that finds a way to mount the camera so that you don't see the frame or the props, and you still get a wide-angle lens. When that happens, I think then the GoPro and this camera will compete a lot more directly. But for now, the fact that we're mounting this camera where we traditionally mount an FPV camera limits its application somewhat as an HD camera. If you're just shooting and you want good quality video, slightly better quality video than analog, it's great. But if you're trying to produce something cinematic, if you're trying to produce something impressive for YouTube, it's just not an option because it's not producing, the field of view just doesn't work for those applications. Okay. Well, I hope this has helped you decide whether the RunCam Split is something you want to buy. Whether you buy it or not, I think we have to give RunCam massive credit for this is a real innovation. They are, as far as I know, the first to do this. Fill up the comments with telling me who I forgot about, who did it first. And I think this is a really good direction to go. I think it also is exciting because it shows how good a CMOS camera can look. I think we're going to see a lot more CMOS cameras in the future. Sorry to people who hate CMOS cameras. It can look really good, and I hope that the Eagle 3 looks as good as this, but with less latency. Leave it to me to bring everything back to the Eagle. Thanks for watching, and happy flying.